Well, welcome all to the second evening of presentations of history and Washington Grove. We have our favorite son historian, Phil Edwards, back again, and I'm going to let Bob, as well as another preliminary presentation. So I'm going to let Bob Boer take over from here. Bob?
Great. Yeah, the second night of our sesquicentennial Zoom Fest. So the first, our first presentation is largely Joan Mahaffey, and maybe Patty will contribute, but they have both been very active in recreating Whetstone Spring. I do have a brief bio of Joan. So Joan moved to Washington Grove in 1946 when her father, Donald McCatherine, was discharged from the Army Corps and bought his grandfather's house at 109 Maple Avenue next to us. Her family has a long tradition in the Grove. Her great-great-grandparents, James and Mary Harrison, attended the very first camp meeting in 1873. Her great-grandfather, Albert Osborne, was the first pastor of the Washington Grove United Methodist Church, started in 1910. Her grandfather, Roy McCatherine, was the town's first mayor. Her father was mayor for 4 years, from 1977 to 81. Her sister-in-law, Jolie McCatherine, has been mayor, and her father-in-law, Charles Mahaffey, and brother, Ken McCatherine, both served on the town council. She's the second child of a family of 10 children who grow up at 109 Maple Avenue, which I may point out only has one bedroom. She left the Grove.
Had one bathroom. There were more than one bedroom.
Oh, okay.
One bathroom.
But you all stayed up in the dorm upstairs, right?
Right.
She left the Grove when she married and taught in Prince George's public schools for several years. Then her husband, Charles, got a job at the Kitt Peak National Observatory in Tucson, so they moved there. And she worked as a bilingual teacher in Tucson, United School District, raised 4 children there. When she was widowed, she moved back to the Grove and worked and retired as an ESOL teacher from Montgomery County Public Schools, and continues to substitute teach in the two-way immersion program in Washington Grove Elementary School. Joan bought Richmond Clapperton's house at 102 Ridge Road, where she lives now with her daughter Carol and her 2 grown children, Zayed and Yasmin. Her son Charlie bought her parents' house at 109 Maple, where he lives with his wife, Muki, and their children, Saya and Lucy. Those grandchildren are 7th generation Washington Grove residents. She has personal memories of much of Grove life through the years, including Whetstone Spring, which she and Pat Klein have successfully recreated after many years of trying. Joan, you want to take it?
In my biography, I didn't mention one of the most important parts of my life. Patty and I are co-chairs of the Woods Committee. When I moved back, I noticed that the woods were starting to die from non-native invasive plants and overbrowsing of deer. So I joined the committee. And when Ann Briggs resigned, Patty agreed to co-chair with me. And so I'm happy to serve on that committee and on several other committees as well, because there's a lot of collaboration between committees in town. But my first love is the Woods Committee. Good evening, neighbors and friends of Washington Grove. We've been asked to present a brief history of the Whetstone Spring. The Woods Committee chose to restore Whetstone Spring as our special project for Washington Grove's 150th celebration. Both Maple Spring and Whetstone Spring were used by Grove's residents for water. This is a picture of Whetstone Spring in the West Woods, north of Maple Lake. The picture was taken in 1961. 2 Grove teenagers, Jim McCatherine, my brother, and Greg Frank, Cynthia Wirtz's brother, had cleaned up the spring and took the photo. We used this as the basis for our restoration. Maple Spring is another spring in the West Woods located just south of Maple Lake. The Methodists use this area for their camp meetings, this area of Washington Grove. Because of its proximity to the railroad, its relatively flat terrain, and the abundance of springs. So what is a spring? According to Wikipedia, a spring is a natural exit point at which groundwater emerges out of the aquifer and flows onto the top of the Earth's crust to become surface water. Springs have long been important for humans as a source of fresh water, especially in arid regions which have relatively little annual rainfall. This area was a popular north-south route even before colonization. In 1755, General Edward Braddock traveled along what is now Route 355 on his way to Fort Duquesne during the French and Indian Wars. Fort Duquesne is now Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and this sign was taken up at 355 and North Summit Avenue. There's a legend that George Washington sharpened his sword at Whetstone Spring on his way to meet General Braddock at Fort Duquesne. Whetstone Spring has traditionally been used by Grove's families for campouts and picnics. At one point, there was a small fireplace similar to the one in Woodward Park. When I was a girl, my friends and I would go to the spring to just sit and talk. My father would take our kitchen knives to the spring to sharpen them on the whetstone. However, during the 1960s, the spring began to be vandalized. The capstone was taken, the rocks were dispersed. The week before restoration began, Whetstone Spring looked like this. You could hardly see it. Preparation for the restoration began several years ago when the Woods Committee sponsored work days to clear the spring area of non-native invasive plants. Japanese barberry, privet, and greenbrier were cleared. Before we began restoration, Wendy Harris from the Historic Preservation Commission examined the site for pre-colonial artifacts. RJ landscape workers laid the stonework and cleared the stream bed. They're the ones who did all the heavy work. And RJ Landscaping is the town contractor for landscaping. Jim Quinn, the owner of RJ Landscaping, directed the crew and provided artistic inspiration in the design. Steve Wirtz is our hero who worked with Jim and RJ Landscaping and the town every step of the way. Unfortunately, we didn't have a picture of Steve, but this one's appropriate. Patty and I helped with the rock shopping, but left the heavy work to others. And the final restoration is more glorious than we ever imagined. The stream bed was cleared. Rocks were placed to outline the stream bed and prevent erosion. A new capstone was placed. A secondary spring to the left of the main spring was also restored. Finally, stepping stones were placed from the trail above down to the spring. Ferns and viburnum were planted to fill in where the construction left the area bare. There is something called generational memory, which states that each generation uses their own experience as a baseline. We took the Summer in the Parks group to Whetstone Spring to create a generational memory of the past. Previous changes are lost to memory or severely diminished in impact to emphasize how nature suffers when historical threats and deterioration are not passed on to the next generation. We made this field trip with the Summer in the Parks. We took the trail off the Maple Lake parking lot. It's called the Whetstone Trail, and it passes right by the dog park. It's a fairly easy trail to walk until you get to the creek. About midway, we had to climb down and up to cross a main creek, which runs through the woods. Someone said today that the creek is dry now. It may be a little easier, but I wanted to point out that this is a rustic trail for those who decide to walk out to the spring on Sunday afternoon. The first side of the spring is down to the left, and it's a view from above the capstone. And you can see the capstone in this picture. You can see the stones lining both of the springs. And on the right, you can see the stepping stones going up to the trail. Just after you see the first view of the trail, there's a split where the poplar trail, which looks like the main trail, heads off to the right, but you need to take the smaller trail down to the left and keep the spring in your view as you wander around. We told the children some of the history of the spring. We encourage them to visit the spring often and help protect it in the way Grovers had done before them. We listened to their comments and answered their questions. We hope they will return soon and often. Science has confirmed many health benefits to spending time in nature. According to the U.S. Department of Agricultural Forest Service, exposure to forests strengthens our immune system, reduces blood pressure, increases energy, boosts our mood, and help us regain and maintain our focus in ways that treeless environments just don't. These benefits don't necessarily come from intense physical activity people do in the forest, such as hiking or mountain biking. Almost any activity can reap the benefits of a short sojourn to the woods. The Japanese term shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing. Even 20 minutes in a forested area is enough to produce positive changes in the body. And so Patty and I have really worked to restore the woods and to maintain the trails, upgrade the trails, to mark the trails. We're working on doing maps of the 2 forest preserves. And this is one of the reasons we encourage the Wood Committee to restore Whetstone Spring. Now, our rededication ceremony is Sunday at 3 p.m. at Whetstone Spring in the West Woods. And this map will be available at the welcome desk. You can take either walk along the Pink Trail or drive along the Blue Trail in Washington Grove Lane and park in the lake parking lot and take the trail that we took with Summer in the Parks. But I would suggest the easiest way is to go out of the Grove, down Railroad Street, turn left on Diamond Avenue, and then right on Girard. And at the first traffic circle, you're going to turn right towards the Harriet Tubman School, the new school that's been built there. And just past the school, you can park there at the school. And just past the school, there is a gravel pathway that leads past the ball fields, past the concession stand, and down into the woods. And the spring is only about 50 feet inside the woods. So the easiest way to get there is to come from this Gaithersburg side and walk a short distance into the woods, go across the Washington Grove border, and you'll see the trees framing the capstone ahead, and just walk on in, and we'll be waiting for you there. So we hope to see you on Sunday afternoon for an inspiring forest experience.
Yeah, that's great, Joan. This is really exciting that we finally, after years, have gotten it together to recreate the spring. And maybe Maple Spring is next after that.
We'll see. There's been talk of that.
I had a question. I heard a story that the photo in 1961 was that spring was actually a second creation of the spring. Wasn't it also pilfered in the past?
Yeah, I think it had been pilfered in the past, and the Grove leaders replaced the capstone in the 50s as well.
Oh, that's great. Does anybody else have any questions about Whetstone Spring?
Just a quick note, the current capstone, I believe, is a ton. So don't take any thoughts about trying to pick it up and move it.
Yeah, when Patty and I were doing our shopping, weight was a main criteria.
Yeah, RJ really appreciated that, I bet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but Jim and Steve never complained once about the weight.
Wow.
Anything we wanted, they were there for.
They had the equipment.
Right.
Yep.
And it is breathtaking. I really encourage you to go out and see it. If you can't come Sunday, make it another time. Mornings, like 10 o'clock. It's glorious. It's one of the few places in the West Woods where the sun shines directly down, and it shines right on the capstone.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a forest cathedral. It's very spiritual.
Anybody have questions, comments?
This is such. I was there this morning. It was fantastic. I've never seen anything done so well as you guys did in the West Woods. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hutch. We'll be talking to you and the Lake Committee about that Maple Lake spring. We got plans.
Thank you for your comments. It was a pleasure. This is one thing I can cross off my bucket list.
Okay, if there's no further comments, we'll move on to the next part of the program. And for those who missed Phil's program last night, the next speaker was a longtime resident. He was mayor, he was planning commissioner, he was town historian, and he wrote the 2-volume history of Washington, the history of Washington Grove, that is the go-to book for anybody looking for information. Last night, he discussed the time period between the founding in 1873, 150 years ago, to the establishment of the town in 1937. He's going to pick up tonight at that point and also talk about some of his personal reminiscences growing up in the Grove. Take it away, Phil.
Well, thank you. You hearing me all right?
Yep.
Good. I want to thank Joan and Pat, or Patty as she's now called, for their good work. I have wonderful memories of having picnics with the family at Whetstone Spring while the fireplace was still there. Very, very good experience. Also some benches, if I remember correctly. Anyway, tonight I've got another talk called Another Reminiscence. It's a nod to Paige Milburn's memoir. Basically, I'm going to reminisce out loud. Last night, I talked about the association and its fatal flaw. A lot of it was technical about stock shares and lots and leases. Grove became a town on the vote of March 1937, but what did that mean? What was it like? What were the demographics? Now it had a true representative government, for better or worse. Roads, taxes, rules. More personally, though, what was it like for me in 1946? I was a total newcomer, almost 3 years old. The Grove I moved into in 1946 looked a lot like the Grove of 1937. Main difference being that more of the cottages have been rented to outsiders, people who knew or cared little about its history. As I was to learn later, the Grove of 1937 looked a lot like the Grove of 1933, the year of Plan Number 3. Regardless of all the controversies over the stock and deeds, there were still 3 sorts of Grovites: the ones who lived here year-round, the ones who owned property and rented it out, and the few who lived in the city but still had summer cottages. We were a new kind, the 4th kind, the post-war cohort. In the years before I got here, the war had taken over the national discourse and the housing market. My family of 3, before my time, came to work for the government. An apartment in Riverdale in PG County was the closest they could get to the city. Back from Portland, a year in Portland, Oregon in 1945, there was another temporary red brick apartment, this time in Rockville. Now, a family of 5, we had to go even farther out of town. We ended up in the Grove. These are my personal recollections, starting in the 1940s, moving in, trucks on Grove Avenue, being squeezed against the wall by large men carrying large furniture. Next door neighbor, Zoe Wadsworth, a lovely eccentric lady from the time of Chautauqua. Her mother's 19th century wooden wheelchair still sat on her front porch. My sister finding a Confederate $2 bill under the lining in a trunk on the front porch. Cast iron light fixtures on the walkways. Chickens across Grove Avenue, heads chopped off, still trying to fly. No other kids at first. When a family rented on Acorn Lane, my mother made the long walk with me because she'd learned they had a son about my age. It didn't take. We walked home. Generally, women didn't drive, but Zoe did. Living in the Alps. Nobody had a house number then, just a house name. Zoe's house was Zomar for Zoe and Mary. Mary died unexpectedly during or shortly after the war. I don't know, I think automobile accident. Because of its many gables, number 114 Grove Avenue was the Alps. There was a sign over the front steps. At first, we had an Irish maid for laundry and cleaning. She was said to be illiterate, but possibly she was literate only in Irish. I'll never know. Maud Nuttall rented the Alps to us. She owned or controlled as many as 8 Grove Cottage rentals at that time. She was a taciturn woman who walked with a cane, which I could imagine being hit with. Never was. The Alps had a wood cook stove in the kitchen. I was told not to touch it, so I laid the back of my hand on it instead. I can still see the scar. The back porch of the Alps was enclosed and had a proper 1930s range on it, one of those with 4 burners on the left and an oven at chest height on the right. One day, the pressure cooker blew its top and the ceiling, walls, and floor were covered in tomato sauce. There was a coal furnace down some steps from the living room. Around dawn, my father would go out to the coal shed in only his nightshirt to bring in fuel for the morning fire. A scandal. Around town, the original humpback bridge, lower and flatter than the one that would replace it in 1948 or 49. Steam engines pulling trains. My recurring nightmare about the engine leaving the tracks and chasing me down Railroad Street. School in Oakmont. Betty Bradley of Macaulay Street was my teacher. In first grade, there was no indoor plumbing, just a pump in the yard and outhouses on the edge of the property. Miss Bradley was a wonderful teacher, but the school needed a principal and she didn't have the proper credentials. So for the next 5 years, I would have Mrs. Grace E. Berlin. She was a good disciplinarian. She was good with math, not much on geography as a result. I still have to Google some countries to be sure which continent they're on. The doctor and nurse came to school and gave us all smallpox vaccinations. A policeman came in to warn us not to get into cars with strangers. Large cans of war surplus food was stored in a closet near the front. It was in anticipation of there being a kitchen, but there was no kitchen. It stayed there for years. One day, there was a loud bang. On inspection, one of the cans had exploded. It was a very smelly mess. We were sent home for the day. The train station with the potbelly stove in the waiting room. Ticket window like in a bank. The room on the right had been the ladies' waiting room. I think it still had the sign, but now it was just the freight office. There were men's and ladies' toilets in a little building on Railroad Street. It had big wooden drawers in the back that would have to be emptied. Wild strawberries used to grow along the road there. We picked and ate them. The post office was the other side of the tracks in a tiny closed-in porch on the right side of Spillman's store. Spillman's store was like something out of the Wild West, shelves piled high with dry goods. Outgoing mail was bagged up twice a day and handed to the station master. He placed it on a pole and the express train would grab it as it flew by. As for the bag of incoming mail, it was simply tossed off. Don't get in the way. The station master could retrieve it after the train had passed. Once or twice, we picked it up and carried it to him. I think it was a violation of federal law. Theoretically, you could mail a letter to Gaithersburg by 10 in the morning, and it would be received by 11. You could have an answer on the outgoing train by 2 o'clock. Don't know if anybody ever did that. 1950s, shiny new bathrooms inside the school, a new, bigger humpback bridge, picnics at Whetstone Spring, gathering watercress in Maple Spring, The old concrete dam from the abandoned Maple Lake was like a Roman ruin we played on. There was a faulty furnace vent in the Alps one day. My father came home to everybody sick in bed from carbon monoxide poisoning. Halloween was a scary time in the early 50s. Going to school the day after, I saw lawn furniture and tree branches. The next year, a wicker chair left our porch and was set on fire out on the avenue. Better on the gravel than on the porch. Plays and movies in the auditorium. Shuffleboard on the north and south sides. Cue sticks and wooden discs in a rack. Because the floor was tilted toward the stage, it was like playing croquet on a hill. You had to put a lot more into your shove going uphill. Same for the basketball court down near the stage. Tough throw from the lower side. Men's and ladies' dressing rooms next to the stage. Smelly bathrooms next to the dressing rooms. Sunday school in the assembly hall. Barbara Bent was my teacher. 2 smelly bathrooms in the basement. Kids showed up. Healy's, Hundley's, Stoltz's, Sylvester's. Enough for a baseball team. Adventures. Jim Healy and I made bombs. We stole flares and signal torpedoes from the railroad. Jim can do anything with a motor. I'm more into electricity. Nothing blows up in radio, he says. The ice cream factory across from the commercial corner. On a hot summer day, the man who ran it, a young guy back from the war, would let us go inside the freezer to cool off. He'd also give us free samples directly out of the vats. Going to school, over the tracks, past Billman's, past a garage where Robert lived with his horse. Always a wave from Robert. Robert used to clear the snow from the walkways, sitting on a skid his horse dragged behind it. One morning, on the way to school, the garage was a smoking ruin. Robert died in the fire. Mr. and Mrs. Rex sold the ice cream factory and opened a restaurant. Rex, R-E-C-K''S. Somebody else took it over and called it Rex, R-E-X. Then Mrs. Tull, to later become my brother's mother-in-law, reopened it as Rex's, R-E-X-E-S. Then the Wismans from West Virginia took it over. She ran the restaurant while her husband sat in his car all day smoking cigarettes. Quite a pile outside the window. We moved down Grove Avenue to 206, and nobody knew its name. My parents, like Strauss, decided to call it Flater House after the opera. No interior ceilings in Flater House, only thin partitions for the bedrooms. In my brother's and mine, there was a hole in the wall where the siding had rotted away. A toilet and sink behind a partition, no bathtub or shower. A dining room and kitchen had been added, but the dining room floor supports had rotted out. Walking across it was like walking on a waterbed. At the age of 10, I opened DT's TV repair shop, fixed what I could, typed up 3x5 cards and distributed them. Sometimes a car from Emory Grove would chauffeur me and my box of tubes out Laytonsville Pike. I went from house to house there, fixing what I could. I noticed pictures of Jesus on their walls. His skin was very dark, made me wonder. This one I'm not sure about. Seems to me that Spillman of the store must have been Mr. Cross's son-in-law. That's my guess. Anyway, I think it's Cross who died when I was in 6th grade, and all 3 of us were sent down to view his body in the parlor and sign his book on behalf of the school. Later, the post office moved into that room. Finding arrowheads in the field downstream from the old lake. I think there are probably still a lot of them still there, but they're under those houses. Collecting stamps. Stamp club meetings at Warren and Rosalie's house. He's a stamp collector. He also has a real $10,000 bill in a frame on his wall. No kidding. Maple Spring gets dammed up with a huge berm. The lake fills up, but leaves an island. Fancy dock with diving board. Everybody takes lessons. My father spends his evenings. He didn't have much money to do anything else at the time, paying for that house. So he spent his evenings digging a basement under Flater House. 3 rooms and a bathroom, all by hand. The mound you park your car against in Chapel Park, across from McCatherine Hall, is the basement of our house. New high school opens in Gaithersburg. My first year, 7th grade, is my sister's last year, 12th grade. The new furnace in Flater House catches fire. We have to spend the night at Rosalie's. I wet the bed. Ham radio with Butchie Fry. Up most of the night talking in Morse code with my night kit transmitter and my Helicrafters receiver. Roy McCatherine retires. Big town meeting. George Pugh elected. George commutes. He leaves his house on Acorn Lane when he hears the whistle in Gaithersburg. He never misses the train. Later, he moves to Grove Avenue. Easier commute. He complained that he could never get the timing right after that. Suicides. A decade of suicides. Neighbors, friends of neighbors, people just looking for a handy place to end it all. One man drove to a field on Ridge Road and hooked up a hose to the exhaust pipe. His son was in the car with him. 16 years old, driver's license. 2 tickets in the first week. High school senior, not studying for midterms, skipping midterms, dropping out, bad idea. 1960s, I go into the Air Force on my 17th birthday. It didn't take. 6 months later, back at home. Odd jobs, stocking shelves at Hershey's store, painting houses. Then my ham radio friend, Bud O'Neill, said if I got a second-class commercial radio license, he'd give me a job fixing 2-way radios. I passed the test. I was in my second career. Joe Sylvester's mayor. My friends Ginger and Miranda are interns at the Mountain Theater in Braddock Heights. I visit, I hang around to help, living on the 4th floor of the Francis Scott Key Hotel. Eventually, as disgruntled members left, I first got the title of lighting director without knowing anything about it, then technical director. But then in August, the theater was condemned by the fire department and shuttered. Back home. The auditorium was in bad shape. Idea, maybe fix it up for a summer theater, like in a 30s musical. I'd draw up plans with producer Bill Brining of the Mountain Theater, present them at town meeting. Defeated by 1 vote. Probably a good thing. Started commuting to College Park in my MGTD before the Beltway. Long, cold drive. It didn't take, dropped out in 2nd semester. Got married to Anna and bought the Blodgett house on the Circle from Dr. Sears. Mortgage, $75 a month, a whole new world. Start college again, work in 2-way radio, graduate, move to California. It didn't take. Back home. 1970s. Working for IBM in Gaithersburg. They paid my way to come back. My parents moved to Mexico. I met Susie, fell in love, bought Flater House. Blue dots on the big tulip poplars in the Lake Woods. We're told the West Woods has always provided the town with income, but times change. Al Christie resigns. I run for town council. Then run off to Europe for 3 weeks and return to be defeated by my campaign manager. Run again next year? No. Appointed as mayor when Don Dowdy left early. 4 years. Then I resign and become the town historian. I start digging into the history. The 80s, mostly a blur. After we bought an old farm in Pennsylvania and worked on it most weekends. But I got the history done. published by the town in '88. Wrote a novel after that called The Leper Colony. It's still out there. Teaser. The novel begins in Louisiana, but ends in a small town in Maryland named Shady Grove. 1990s, leaving the Grove. Hard choice. One thing is what to do with the Page Milburn dresser. This was a tall, probably 6-drawer, yellow wooden dresser with vines and flowers painted on it by Zoe Wadsworth. It had a placard on the back stating it had been made from wooden packing crates by Dr. Page Milburn, whose recollections written in 20 are well worth reading. It was probably in the Alps when we moved in. It traveled with us to Flater House, and it was still there when Susie and I bought the house from my parents in '72. I recollect finding a trustworthy person to take it off our hands so it could stay in the Grove where it belongs, but I just don't remember who that was. Maybe one of you does. I hope the dresser's still here somewhere. Like furniture in Washington Grove, many people have lived in more than one house. For me, it was 3 different houses, plus I once owned a 4th. In my book, I give Brenda for Gumala credit for living in the most houses, 5 at my count, but I recently recounted, and it's Anna Woodruff Edwards-Radlinsky McDermott, who seems to be the current champion at 6 different houses. Will there be a challenger for that title in the future? Time will tell. After the novel was published, I started working in earnest on volume 2, The Town History, and continued to work after the move to Pennsylvania. It quickly got too personal, like this talk. So I ended the book at 1977 and got it published just before the world ended on Y2K. Someone will carry it on, I thought, and I'm sure they will. Thank you for listening. I hope it's been interesting.
Yeah, it's been fascinating, actually. I love the personal touches of all of it. The reminiscences in the playing in the auditorium. The auditorium must have been an amazing thing to have here in the Grove to do all the things. I know other people remember the auditorium too that are probably on this call. Anybody else want to share a memory of the auditorium? Or the Grove? Yeah, anywhere.
The auditorium, there would be summer programs, as Phil said, films and musicals, but also there was a children's recreational program there. And that's where we would play shuffleboard. But the favorite activity was just to run around the perimeter inside and hear the boards thud, 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 thud. But we had crafts. And I remember one summer they had a doll show. And I had a doll, but my brothers, it was one of those dolls that was stuffed, except for the head, which was paper mache. And my brothers had bashed the head in, but it was the only doll, and I wanted to be in the doll show. So my mother went into her cedar chest and got a little newborn knit cap and a little newborn knit outfit, and I put it in the show. And when I walked in and saw a blue ribbon hanging from that doll, it was one of the happiest days of my life. So yeah, we learned, that's where I learned how to do what we called GIMP, how to do that kind of weaving. The jute, they had a wonderful jukebox there, didn't they, Phil?
They sure did.
Mm-hmm.
It was a rockola.
78s?
Yes. Yeah.
When we were in high school, everybody wanted a friend in the Grove because we had the lake. This was before community pools. We had the lake, and then we had teen club at the auditorium. And we went to school with a girl named Cindy Hare, and all she wanted in the whole world was to live in Washington Grove. So she married Don Dowdy, and he moved her to the Grove.
Yeah, teen club was really something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, when the auditorium was torn down, the teen club had to move to the town hall.
Right. but I have fond memories of playing shuffleboard at the auditorium. So thank you, Phil, for that memory. And as for the teen club, I remember when it moved to the town hall, Brother Jim, I think, was the first president. The second president was Brother Joe. And then Brother Bob took over from him. And for some sad reason, I was the last teen club president.
You put it to sleep, huh?
Well, there wasn't anybody picking it up afterwards, and Janet Bell was the treasurer. And some 20 to 30 years later, we finally decided to just consolidate that account and donate it to the town. So we had to go to the bank to close out the teen club account. But they used to raise funds by raking leaves and doing other chores around town. We had a pool table there. I well remember the orange drinks from the soda machine that was in there. And just a lot of fond memories of the teen club at the hall.
Wow.
They also used to do shows at the auditorium, and I remember Doris Hershey and her two daughters singing "Que Sera Sera," and one of them was a book, and the set was a book, and for each group they would turn the page on the book. And there was a woman named Mrs. Swan, Peggy Swan's mother. And she played a piano song, but she had this big bow that kept falling. So you're up and throw the bow, throw the bow, throw the bow. But she's the one when they started clearing the area for where the church and everything is now, that it was all woods. And Mrs. Swan came down to tell my parents that the surveyors had been there. And I was quite young. And she said, they left a line, like a surveyor's line. She said, they left a line in the woods. I heard they left a lion in the woods. Oh, I wouldn't go in those woods for the longest time. The Grove was a wonderful place to grow up, and it's a great place to grow old. And I was gone in between.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but if you got in trouble in Washington Grove, your parents knew before you got home.
Yeah. And any adult could punish you, and you were still going to get punished again when you got home than your parents.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, it wasn't the Grove kids didn't want to get in trouble. We just didn't get the chance.
Well, I think we got in some trouble from time to time. I remember after the auditorium wasn't being used anymore, but the windows weren't boarded up yet. We used to just go down the side and slide one door open and slip in and play inside.
Yeah.
It was great. Later, I don't know if we left a door open or something, but they put locks on all those sliding doors. We couldn't do that anymore. So we went around back where there was a door you could lift up, climb into the crawl space, and crawl over to the middle of the stage.
I remember
where there was a trap door. So we could go push the trap door up, climb up into there, and have a good time. Then kids started breaking windows and that sort of thing. And so they boarded the
different generation than ours.
Yeah, different for sure. And yeah, at that point, it wasn't fun to break in anymore because it was all dark.
Well, the Jungle Gym that's still up, it's up near the road now. It's the bar across. My brother decided to walk across it. I had no idea how old you were, but he slipped down in between it and cracked open his head. And my parents didn't sue the Grove. They said, "Why were you so dumb?"
I was really surprised this afternoon on a walk to see that we called that the Jungle Gym, and that it's still there. Yep. And we used to walk across it too. That was a feat. I could probably still stand up, but I don't think I'd make it very far.
Yeah.
So we used to go and hang from the monkey bars by our knees, and we'd hang there for half an hour just talking.
Yeah.
I guess that's why we were so smart now, because all that blood flowing to our brain then.
So is the big slide from that era?
One of those slides was there when we moved.
Yeah. I remember when they put the slide in. We all went over and took wax paper too, but
wax paper, yeah.
It was so much fun
flying down that thing.
How about the Jungle Gym that's on the other side of Center Street near the near the sort of the seesaw that makes a lot of noise.
That came later, but there was the round thing that we would jump on and get it going, and almost by centrifugal force, hang on to it.
It takes a lot of centrifugal force these days to get it going.
Yeah.
And some of the fathers made a couple swinging horses. I mean, they constructed the horses from wood, built the frame, hung the horses, and you could just go as high as you wanted on. There was always a lot of things to do. Higher, right.
That's great.
I want to add that my son Tag, who grew up here in 30 years ago, used to play Grove golf around town, hitting golf balls from one place to another with Jesse Pacquiao, Colin Delaney, David Newman. So this was a great golf course if you didn't mind hitting a few windows or buildings in the meantime.
And my father used to shoot archery in the field. And what's over the little shed by the tennis court, he built that originally to store his targets. Oh. Can you imagine the town letting him go out and shoot archery there now?
I remember that.
Yeah.
And when I was 10, my friend and I saved up our money so we could buy pogo sticks. And we had our challenge that summer to get on the pogo stick at Maple and Brown and go down Brown Street, up across the railroad tracks, down the railroad tracks, and step onto Hershey's porch without touching the ground. And we did it.
Wow. And my father was on the very first planning commission.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, that was very, very insightful to get the planning and zoning authority into the town. Yeah. That was a great move on probably Roy's part. John, you've had your hand up for a while.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt all these reminiscences. Likely more interesting to my question. Phil, you said that there was a proposed renovation of the auditorium, which lost by one vote. Probably a good thing. Why is that probably a good thing? I mean, from our skewed 2020 hindsight, we'd love to have the auditorium around, but apparently it was not so popular back when it was demolished. So
it was not being used, and it was being vandalized, and there was always a question of upkeep and the question of insurance. The last few uses before the theater proposition were pretty seamy. For example, there was a kind of a flea market auction going on where the first few iterations of that auction were great, old furniture, really nice furniture and so forth. But after a few iterations, it was down to bags of stuff that you didn't want. And so that was pretty ugly. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Phil. Phil, I want to ask you a question. When the auditorium was torn down, that was the vote to tear it down was the same night as the theater was voted down. Is that right?
I don't think so. No. In fact, I think if you look at the second history, it tells how that progression took place. The theater idea was great, but it was going to be a commercial enterprise. It was going to flood the town with cars, a couple nights a week, and it wasn't the best idea in the world.
I remembered that the people that wanted to have the theater later went and opened the Washingtonian Theater over by where 270 is now.
Before it Gross then.
The Shady Grove Music Fair. Yeah.
I was good before it Gross.
Okay. Well, so I always remember that the night that they voted down the theater, they voted to tear the building down, and then that was to keep this from ever coming up again. As Phil said, there would have been people parking in the ball field, and a couple nights a week, it would have been a big commercial enterprise. So anyway.
Also, the playground has a drainage problem now, and that wooden building was built on that lot. So who knows what the foundation looked like.
The original problem with the Brining proposal was that Brining had a reputation that was not good. He was in bankruptcy, and that would have given the town an additional problem. He wasn't a reputable person, so it was complicated.
I could testify to that. Of course, I was with him at the Mountain Theater, and I think the Mountain Theater was condemned partly because they wanted to get rid of Bill Brining.
Yeah.
Phil, when you were talking about the auctions, first auction I ever went to, I was fairly young, but there was something I wanted, so I bid 10 cents. And he said 10 cents, 10 cents. So I said, oh, 20 cents. And I just kept bidding it. Finally, the guy says, will you stop bidding against yourself? I think I had that thing up to $1 and I could have had it for a nickel.
Phil, do you remember between Grove Road and Maple Avenue, the walkway, Center Street used to go all the way through town from, continued on past where the garage is now to Ridge Road?
Certainly it did, and did for many years, but it was never paved or never in good shape. Plus, there's that stream crossing about halfway along. It would either be a stream crossing or just be a big muddy area, so it wasn't practical.
Remember somebody, I remember who, but I won't say who. The motive for closing it was because the Atomic Energy Commission was about to open in Germantown, and this was at a town hall meeting, and this individual said, you wouldn't be surprised to know who it was, said we needed to close the street to keep the riffraff from the AEC from cutting through town. I remember hearing that.
I would remember that.
Yeah.
Well, it worked, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the town's had its battles right from the start.
I have one comment. This is Gil Fry. My first memory of the Grove was in December 1947. We moved in the next month in December 48, which was a really snowy winter here. It was up over my chest. Of course, I was a little kid. But anyway, there were two of the houses up one circle that still had the tents rigged from the era of when they had the town meetings there. They had the porch and the kitchen, and then the tents were rigged. They weren't out there, but I can still remember two of those being rigged there. So I may be one of the last specifically remembers the tents on the houses in the circle.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And for everybody else here, Joni McCatherine was my first adult girlfriend. 14 and I was 15. We had a wonderful summer at the old auditorium.
Gil was also there the day that Phil Winter Sr. blew up the lake.
Yes.
All these boys were down there and suddenly Phil yelled, "Run!" You know where the lake is? Okay, it broke windows all the way up to Ridge Road.
What did he do?
He was trying to clear a stump, and he apparently put a little bit too much charge.
Oh,
Wow.
I think they on the lake at that time, Warren Winter has some great stories about.
Oh, Warren was too young to remember that day. He was not around yet.
Well, I need to weigh in on this because, of course, we heard the explosion, and in those days it was customary if something bad was happening, to hop in the car and go find out what it was. Well, in this case, it was right there close enough that we could walk. So it was after dark, or at dusk anyway, when we got down there to see this sea of mud and pieces of wood just all over the place. It was like a war zone. But as it got darker, we saw that all this wood was glowing. So this bits of wood, it was like little fires everywhere, but they were cool fires.
Wow.
Very interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
Wow.
A Phil Winter special.
Yeah.
Yeah, there weren't many dull moments.
You know what that glowing was, Phil?
Well, it's some kind of phosphorescence from the rotting wood. I mean, that's the way it was explained to me at the time, that if you blow up a stump, you're going to get that.
Yeah.
Maybe partly because they had wet feet, these trees.
Yeah.
So not sure.
It just made me think about how when I first moved here, it was only 36 years ago, so I'm newbie, but I would take my boys for nature walks in the woods, and I took them for a nature walk in the woods at night. And I think this was in May, something like that, I don't know. And I noticed something glowing in the leaf litter along the trail, because we weren't, we had flashlights, but when we weren't looking with the flashlights, there was a little glowing in it. And it turned out to be...
She's Francis's mother-in-law.
Very important person.
Oh.
It turned out to be the larva, it wasn't the glowworms, it was from fireflies. It was back when we had a lot more fireflies back then. They're almost none now. It's kind of exciting when you see 3 or 4. But there were a lot of fireflies, and like a month or so before you see the fireflies come out, the larvae of some species are there and glow. And that was such an interesting discovery, and I showed that to my boys. So you don't think it was firefly that got blown up?
No.
Okay.
Any other reminiscences people want to bring? Well, if not, since we started out with Luther's fantastic commemorative poem, I thought we would end up with a poem from the past. And this one is from 1915. It's in Phil's book. And it was written by Carl Loeffler, who was one of the association presidents and a mover and shaker in the Grove. And it's entitled Washington Grove. Men gathered here in years gone by to worship God beneath the sky, and built these dwellings round his shrine among the chestnut, oak, and pine, a hallowed spot, a place of rest from city life and busy quest. Your charms are great, alluring too. With spring we yearn and turn to you. The spell you cast o'er everyone who in this quiet grove has come, sinks deep into the very soul. From here at last they find their goal. Yea, here indeed, both hand in hand, do God and nature combined stand. Each tiny bird, each warbling thing, speaks but thy praise where loud they sing. The peaceful starry nights serene make joy of life almost supreme. The gentle people living here return with each recurring year to seek the pleasure that you hold, and join once more the friends of old. The fairest praise that we can speak would seem but poor and even meek, compared with what we well might say of your allurements of today. Let no discordant note e'er gain a place within this fair domain that binds us all in unity, each one to all and all to thee.